So welcome to the TDA webinar and training on procurement and the administrative review. So this is our second in a series of procurement trainings that we will be having a webinar for, a Q&A session for, and then posting a self-paced training on our Square Meals website afterwards. So this one is titled Procurement in the Administrative Review. So today we're going to get into some specific procurement requirements. We're going to get into the procurement reviews, some of the things that are required to upload as part of the review, and just really be successful within the procurement reviews. And so what we're going to do is Mary's going to conduct the training, and then we are going to open up the chat for a Q&A session. And then after that, we will make sure that any questions that aren't answered, we will be actually going through the chat and extracting those to be able to answer the questions. And then in a couple of days, then we're going to post the webinar, the Q&As, and the self-paced training on the Square Meals website. And you'll be able to access that from the main page. There should be a link. You can actually access it from the compliance page or the training pages. So for multiple different avenues on squaremeals.org, you'll be able to access this. So without further ado, I'm going to, I know we're going to start with a poll, but I did want to introduce Mary Gomez-Coconos. She is the Assistant Director for School Operations, and she is the one who's going to be conducting the training today. So I'll pass it over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate the time that you're investing into understanding the procurement process as it's going to move forward into the administrative review process. I entered the information from Square Meals onto the chat. We will be posting the recording and the training there, as Nicole mentioned a few minutes ago. So I'm going to share my screen. And please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, Mary, we can see it.
Okay, great. So this training really is all about how TDA will be incorporating the procurement review into the administrative review. As a reminder, if you are not sure if you will be receiving a review this year, you can go onto Square Meals and locate the schedule for next year. It is under our compliance page. So, we will be speaking specifically around some aspects of the administrative review, but please note that this is really focused on the procurement part of that review. And so we'll go ahead and get started on that one, on that note. So with the procurement review process, we just really want to make sure that everybody has an understanding of what that means when we begin the process of reviewing documentation. Now, the documentation for procurement reviews are going to be very specific to vendors and vendor information. So it's really important that as the CE, that you have an understanding of those procurement regulations. As usual, there's a multitude of information that is available to you to ensure that you have resources available so that you are utilizing those federal funds that come from the Child Nutrition Program as how it was intended. And so there are handbooks and manuals, all different types of compliance guidance that is available. Most of you will know that that information is available on Square Meals, but you can also look at USDA regulations, or rather USDA website, and look at ICN for additional information related to the regs. So what we're going to speak to initially is what is the administrative review. Currently, our administrative review will incorporate the procurement review as well as the resource management portions and the high-risk financial reviews. What does that mean for you? What that means is that if you are in the cycle to have a full review, you will have administrative portions as well as the procurement portions of the review during the same time. So resource management, which initially looks at all the financial pieces of the child nutrition fund and any high risk financial reviews that need to be completed will all be completed during this time. As many of you know, the review or the administrative review begins at 13 to 14 weeks. With that being said, we are incorporating much of the procurement review early into the administrative review. We will detail that information in an upcoming 12-week call webinar that will be available for those CEs who are expecting a review this coming year. Notification will be conducted as if there is one review. The review is going to be including the administrative, procurement, resource management, and high-risk financial review. We combine that information with due dates and notification into a comprehensive checklist for you that you will receive upon notification of the review. In most cases, when we begin the procurement portion of the review, the procurement procedures will be required to be uploaded initially. This gives our reviewers an opportunity to understand your procurement procedures and how you have defined that for your district. And so with procurement procedures that are written, we will look and review that information to assess various areas of the procurement review procedures. We will look at specifically how you prepare yourself for determining what procurement methods are to be utilized, whether or not you're forecasting, looking at cost price analysis, and how do you determine that procurement method. As part of procurement procedures, we will be looking at their soliciting and evaluation criteria, specifically for your bids, your proposals, and then again, how you're awarding and monitoring any contracts that you have. So again, the procurement procedure really begins with our reviewers understanding your procedures. It's an important piece of the review as we look at this for guidance in terms of how you have made certain determinations on how you procure items. And so it's really important that procurement procedures be reviewed as often as necessary to ensure that they are being, they are conducted as you're intending to. And so when we begin this process with you, we will note and ask any additional questions as necessary so that we can ensure that we have a firm understanding of your procedures. Within the within the procurement procedures, there is going to be elements of how you utilize the micro purchase and method. And so with that, we want to make sure that everybody understands micro purchase. So micro purchases are really should be used for unplanned and non-routine purchases. When we look at micro, we're looking at the three elements to ensure that those are compliant. Those type of procurement has been compliant with the guidance on micro, which is ensuring that the price is reasonable. How did the CE determine that? How do they ensure that the item has been distributed equitably? And are invoices under the threshold of 10,000 or less? A very important caveat with this coming year is that we recognize that CEs may be self-certifying through TEA and may have an increase in the micro purchase threshold. And if that is the case, we should be seeing that information in your procurement procedures and indicating that information. Again, the procurement procedures is really going to be how you make determinations on how you procure items. So it's very important that that information has been updated and included in that in your procedures. We highly recommend that CEs utilize resources that will help maintain the documentation that will be required to review under micro. Some CEs may elect to use the micro purchase log that TDA has created for you. It is located on Square Meals and does have information related to micro purchase that you can log and maintain, so that when it does come time for your review and you have a reviewer asking various questions about this, your micro purchase, you will have information at your disposal to help the reviewer understand why and how you utilize micro purchases. Small purchase procurement. When we talk about small purchase procurement, again, we will be reviewing that on the procurement procedures. In your procedures, it should indicate what is your threshold. Of course, as we are in Texas, 50,000 is our threshold. It is more restrictive than the federal threshold. So always something to keep in mind and ensure that your procurement procedures reflect that. It is something that we will review as part of the procurement portion of the review. And we will likely ask for the documentation to support any of the vendors selected. Now, the type of elements that we will be looking at when it comes to the small purchase will be ensuring if you received the adequate number of quotes. So as stated before in previous trainings, 3 is required. However, 2, if you have 2 quotes, that is acceptable. And so we will be looking at that information to ensure that the proper procedures as indicated in your procurement procedures have been followed, as well as all the federal guidelines. Food purchases must also comply with Buy American provisions, as well as when reviewing the documentation as to how you receive the quotes, indicating if the quotes were given all the same specification. So we will be looking at how that information was provided to those vendors. And of course, if the award was given, who was given that award and was price the primary factor for that purchase. Again, documentation of this information is going to be paramount. All this information will need to be available to the reviewer when requested. TDA does have a small purchase log that can be utilized if a CE wishes. And the information should include the technical specification, as well as quotes or any additional information received from the particular vendors. Again, formal purchase will also be reviewed in the procurement procedures. We will specifically be looking at how a CE conducts formal purchases or formal procurement, and how those contracts align with the regulations. We will review the thresholds, as well as determine where the appropriate solicitations used, whether it was an IFB or RFP, and also review provisions to see if all the provisions were included into the contract. Buy American provisions will be something that is reviewed for food items. It should be also noted that cost plus percentage contracts that are that have been reviewed, or rather that may be indicated in one of the contracts, are not allowed. And so it's really important to, when you're assessing your formal contracts, to ensure that cost plus percentages are not included. Another important aspect of the review itself will be understanding how you manage that particular contract. And so our reviewers will ask various questions related to monitoring. How well you're monitoring depends on any documentation and how you convey that information to the reviewer. It's really important for us to understand that as the CE, what are your methods? And it could be various things. So it's really important to also include that into your procurement procedures so that we have a good indication of what to expect upon reviewing those procurement procedures. Again, I can't stress this enough, is procurement procedure really will be your foundation of how your procurement review is being assessed. And so even if you have the procurement management information in your procurement procedures, your reviewer will likely ask you specific questions related to any formal contracts that are being reviewed. Something we want to indicate at this portion as well is we really want to make sure that everybody understands capital expenditures. Now, capital expenditures are, need to be approved by TDA in advance for anything, for any capital expenditure greater than $5,000. Now, with that being said, when you seek approval from TDA, you're often asked to upload the quotes for that particular purchase. Please keep in mind that at that point, TDA is not approving the procedures or the procurement for that item, but rather it's looking at whether you're following a process and whether we can allocate those funds for that particular purchase. The review of those purchases will be conducted during the administrative review. Again, the purpose of really incorporating our procurement portion of the review is so that everybody has an understanding of what to expect when you are notified that you will have a review. As a team, TDA is working very hard on streamlining any processes that we can so that it is less burdensome on the CE. We will be combining all our reviews, as mentioned before, to ensure that we are taking that time to complete every aspect of it, which would again include the resource management, any high-risk reviews, as well as the procurement pieces of that. We will conduct these reviews as if we were looking at all of the items that are outlined in 2 CFR 200-319, and then also assessing the financial and procurement regulations based on the documentation that is submitted. So we're going to take a minute to go over the review process as a whole. Again, just to recap, those procurement procedures will be one of the first things that you will be required to upload during this process. When you receive notification of the announcement letter, you will also get information soon after regarding your day of review. But initially, your announcement letter is going to indicate to you that you will be getting a review. You will also ensure that you have a full understanding of what particular pieces of the review you will need to have prior to your 12-week call, and ensure that you have the information related to document all your procurement and administrative portions of the review. Something to keep in mind as we go through this process of reviewing your procurement portions, it is really important that if you are a CE that has an FSMC or food service management company, that due to the nature of the procurement, that we ensure there is no conflict of interest. We ask that the FSMCs are not represented by the CE during the review process, and specifically during the procurement portions of the review where the table has to be completed, as well as providing the documentation for that. CEs should be prepared to upload very initial documentation. As we have already talked about, the written procurement procedures are going to be our guiding information that we use to determine how you are utilizing procurement procedures. And so that is specific to the year that is being reviewed. If you are receiving a review next year, we will be reviewing 2021 documents. And we want to make sure that when you upload that information, that it is the information provided at that time is relevant to how you procured those vendors. If you are using a living document, meaning that you have information that is being updated, you should be keeping a copy of that specific year information and provide both if needed. In addition, we will ask you to upload the code of conduct. Now, the code of conduct is very specific to child nutrition. We want to make sure that we understand what are those, what are the roles and responsibilities of those individuals who are making those procurement decisions. If there's any consequences, especially around a disciplinary action, what occurs if someone violates those items. In addition, we'll ask for the detailed general ledger for your child nutrition account or your 240. We realize that at some point, some of you will have information that you're still trying to close out your fiscal year. And so it's really important that we have an understanding of that. Our reviewers will ask specifically if the fiscal year has been closed, and if this is a ledger that needs to be notated as that. Now, I will also say for a detailed general ledger, we have the resource management section of the review, which reviews the financial pieces of the 240. We will not ask CEs to upload the general ledger twice. Once we receive the general ledger for the procurement, it will also be for the resource management section of the review and any other high-risk review that is needed. But please just make sure that it is as comprehensive as possible. So we do ask for a detailed general ledger. In addition, you will be asked to upload the vendor paid list. Now, the vendor paid list really is just a summary of expenditures that are provided to our team so that they can assess those particular vendors and tie that back to the GL. So we will be looking at the general ledger, the vendor pay list, as well as the procurement table to ensure that it is complete. Once you receive notification and you have received the day of review letter, the day of review letter or email, excuse me, is going to be sent out and will have very pertinent information related to your review. it will provide you with a date of the 12-week call. Now, as mentioned before, we will have a 12-week call webinar, and that particular webinar will be specific to the types of CEs that we have. For instance, if you are a CEP or P2 district, you will review that information related to the type of CE. Usually that information will be available very soon on Square Meals, or rather the webinars will be available very soon. And you can review that information prior to your day of review, or rather prior to your 12-week call. Again, once you receive notification, you will get a day of review email that indicates when your 12-week call meeting will take place. Prior to that meeting, you will have a series of webinars that you can select from to kind of give you additional details to what you should be expecting when it comes to a review. And so those are really important, and we highly suggest you review that information prior to the call. Your assigned reviewer will introduce themselves during a 12-week call. They will explain how the administrative review will be conducted, and including all the pertinent pieces of the procurement section, as well as any high-risk areas in the resource management section. We'll introduce everyone on the call and take your questions, and hopefully have an opportunity to review all the due dates that you will have in your checklist. Your checklist, again, will be provided to you during the during the day of review initial email. So it's important that once you receive that email, you take some time to read it carefully. Make sure you read all the attachments, because there will be several attachments with that email, including things that will help you understand what are your next steps. And the reviewer will also discuss any naming conventions for those items that will need to be uploaded into TX-UNPS. Once the 12-week call has been completed and you have discussed due dates for all the required documents, the reviewer will review information that has been uploaded into TX-UNPS. That will include any documents for the administrative review, but it will also include procurement table information. The procurement table is an important piece of the procurement review, as that tells us how and who and what was procured with your CE. Now, the table must be completed by the assigned due dates, because it'll be very important so that the ARS has an opportunity to review the information and tie that back to the general ledger and the vendor paid list. All of those things will be reviewed for accuracy and for completeness, so that a sample will be conducted of those items. If there is information that is not clear, or there's what appears to be missing information, the reviewer will reach out to gather any additional information needed. We do use USDA guidance to ensure that we are selecting the correct number of vendors per that list and per the table. And so you will then, once we are able to ensure that the table is complete, we will generate these samples and send you that information to gather for the documentation. Once the reviewer has completed a review of the table. They will email the number of vendors needed and the documentation that is required for review. There will be a timeline or deadline for submission of this documentation. And you will need to, again, upload that in TX-UNPS. Things that the reviewer will assess when all the documentation has been received. They will assess how the methods match the written procedures, were cost and price analysis conducted, was the proper method used, how did the CE manage the contract. Other things that we will review is understanding your thresholds, ensuring that we understand the evaluation criteria for any formal contracts, review documentation related to processing if you are a CE who does their own processing, and really just evaluate overall for each type of procurement used. In some cases, the reviewer may elect to host a meeting so that they can ensure they have a very thorough understanding of the series of events that took place, review the documentation, ensure that it's correct information that you provided, or rather just clarify. Or they may phone and email you any additional items that are just really quick clarification. We hope to really get most of this information completed from you by the time the majority of your administrative review begins. So what that means is that in an effort to ensure timeliness, we are looking at really ensuring that you conduct most of the procurement portion prior to uploading meal counts and food production records, things of that nature. So it'll be really important to, again, maintain that documentation and ensure you have it available for the reviewer when requested. It will be requested early into the review. Once the reviewer has had an opportunity to assess and review all the documents and has finalized any questions that they may have, they will complete the rest of the administrative review, including the resource management sections, and complete with your day of review. And once that occurs, you will have an exit conference. Now, the exit conference for the review will be conducted at the same time for all aspects, all portions of the review. You will receive a preliminary report that includes any findings from all the sections of the review. The reviewer will ensure that they go over the findings so that you have an understanding of how to prepare any corrective action documents, and will also ensure that they provide you a timeline as well as the rest of the process on how to respond and document the CAD. Once the CAD has been submitted and the reviewer has approved those items, we will move to close the review. The specialist will ensure that they have all the documentation to close the review, and a letter of closure will be sent to you. So that gives you an overall review of how we're incorporating procurement. Now we want to be sure that everybody has an understanding of what it looks like once you begin the process of uploading that information into TX-UNPS. The procurement review is a separate area than the administrative review. So for those of you who have had an administrative review in the past, you will go into TX-UNPS. However, you will want to go to the compliance part, or rather compliance tab, and really look in your dashboard for the procurement review tracking. Once there, you should see the dashboard, and you should see details around the procurement table. This is primarily the information where you will be reviewing your vendor paid list and entering this information into the table. In TXUNPS, you will be able to indicate some key information related to procurement. Part of that is going to be informing your reviewer if there are any blockout dates or dates with a holiday. You will also indicate who the authority person will be for procurement, as well as indicate small purchase thresholds, and enter information related to any GBO or group buying organizations and any third-party entities that you utilize. Once you are completing the top portion of the procurement table, you will have an opportunity to enter your procurement items or your procured vendors under each type of method. Again, the method being micro, small, formal, FSMC contracts, and processing contracts. We should note that when you utilize any cooperatives or third-party entities, GPOs or GBOs, we will be asking for any interlocal agreements to verify information related to what is covered under that particular agreement. What items are you utilizing that cooperative to purchase? Micro purchase, when you are completing the section on procurement table for micro purchase, first thing you will do is add a vendor for each micro purchase vendor. So reviewing your VPL and determining how you utilize micro purchase method and which vendors you utilized them for. It should be, and you should note that not everything on your VPL are procured items. So if, for example, if you have student vendor or student refunds, they may come out in your expenditure summary or VPL, but they will not be added to the procurement table. And so it's really important that when you are completing this information, that one, you understand what method you used to update, or rather what method you use for this particular vendor, and that non-procured expenses not be added to the table. Those things may include student refunds, utilities, gas and fuel reimbursements, health inspections, those type of things. So again, really important that the procurement table be accurate, and that the vendors are placed in the appropriate type of method used. These are not to be confused with thresholds. Even if you have an item that is under to $10,000 threshold, what we're asking is that the type of procurement method you use? And you should reference all the elements that it requires when utilizing that particular method. For small purchases, as you're entering this information into the table, you will again enter it based on the type of method that was utilized for this vendor. You will enter the vendor name, ID, number, and that number is whatever you associate that particular vendor with. Goods and services provided, the total amount paid to the vendor, as well as the type of purchased or service used or purchased, whether or not this was a one-time purchase, if you received more than one response to the solicitation, and if you utilized a co-op for this vendor. For formal purchases, what we will again be looking at is, did the CE comply with their procurement procedures, and that they indicate that this information is uploaded in the correct location as how they procured this particular vendor. So when you are uploading, or rather when you are completing the formal section of this table, you again enter the name, ID number, what type of good or service you procured, the contract value, the solicitation type, contract duration, whether or not one response was provided, was the vendor obtained through a GPO or GBO, and and help us understand whether or not there were any amendments that were awarded after it was awarded. We also ask during this portion that if you are utilizing the group buying or group purchasing organization, that the RFP number be located in the comment section of each contract. This will be especially important as we are really trying to ensure that we understand what contracts are being utilized, especially around the cooperatives. As we kind of mentioned before, that we are trying to streamline processes around the cooperatives. And what our team is doing is reviewing documentation now for those particular vendors, and ensuring that we have all the information related to your cooperatives so that we can help identify any issues and actually reduce the redundancy in uploading that information for the CEs. But in order for us to do that, we really need to ensure that the RFPs are indicated in the procurement table, specifically around formal contracts. You may have an RFP utilizing the small purchase, and you should also include that into your procurement table, but it primarily will be in the formal section that we'll see RFP numbers. Again, that will help our team ensure accuracy in when we're reviewing the cooperative documentation and aligning that with the members, and ensuring that we have the information ahead of time so that you as a CE are not having to upload those documents again. If you are a CE who utilizes a food service management company, you will also need to indicate that on the procurement table. We do ask for information related to the name, ID number, the type of service provided, the contract value, the solicitation, what year your contract is in, as well as whether or not there was only one response to the contract, and if there was any additional information related to a GPO or GBO. Again, for food service management contracts, it would be considered a conflict of interest if the person who is completing this information is a food service management representative. Processing contracts are also going to be reviewed. If you are a CE who does their own processing, You likely will have a section of that you will need to complete as well. We will be reviewing this and reaching out to our counterparts in USDA Foods to ensure that we are reviewing for any aspects of backhauling of USDA Foods during the review process. So once you've completed the procurement table, we will have a series, or rather an email, that lists all the documents that are going to be required for that particular vendor that was selected. Again, it's really important to ensure that we meet these timelines so that we have an understanding of the actual documents once that table has been reviewed and verified, and we made those selections of the vendors. If you have any vendor, micro vendors, we will ask you to provide us any POs, receipts, or invoices. I know that on here it does ask for the information related to self-certification, but TDA is really working on providing, or rather gathering that information prior to the review so that we have as much of that information for you, and that is not something that you will have to duplicate efforts by uploading again. So again, that reviewer will contact you if they have any additional questions, but we're working on providing a system where we work with TEA to gather that information. For those vendors who have been selected for small procurement, we will require you to upload the solicitation documents, which would include specification and evaluation criteria, bid, quotes, responses, the evaluation of those responses, any purchase orders or receipts and invoices. And then for formal, we will be reviewing, again, solicitation documents. So those things that are very specific to any specifications and technical requirements, as well as the evaluation. How will you be evaluating those proposals that come in? So we will be asking for the bidder responses, asking for additional documentation to support how that was awarded, including any scoring sheets. Then we'll ask for any renewals, amendments, the executed contracts. We will also ask for cost price analysis documentation. And if this was a non-competitive proposal, we'll ask for any TDA documentation or verify that information with you, as well as invoices and the interlocal agreement with the co-op or your GPO. Again, as we recognize that we want to be as efficient with this process as possible, we have been working with several coordinators, co-op coordinators, to streamline that documentation process for you. There will be instances where you may have to upload certain documentation, such as cost price analysis, if the co-op does not provide that for you. In addition, you might have to provide any other formal contracts that are not necessarily tied to the cooperative. And I want to also be very specific when we're working with the coordinators for our ESC cooperatives. So if you're using a GPO or a GBO, things of that nature, or a third-party cooperative that you have procured, you will still need to upload the documentation for that vendor. If you, again, are at CE that has an FSMC company, we will ask for all the documentation that supports that. Most of the documentation that you will need to include will be mostly the invoices. A lot of the information that TDA will have at its disposal will be information related to the final contract. There may be additional items that you may have to upload, but we are really trying to ensure that the duplication of uploads is limited. And so most of that will be the proposals from the bid responses, and then any information related to how it was awarded. So really important to understand that as TDA, we do have access to most of this information, and we will utilize that. However, it is important that as a CE that you maintain your own documentation and provide it when requested. But again, we will be working to avoid any duplication of those uploads. If you are a CE that does their own processing, we will ask for your list of approved foods, your PAL levels, and that may be something that we receive from the weekly bulletin, but also we may ask for additional information from your K-12 or if you're utilizing any other service, so that we have an understanding of where you are with your with the amount of USDA foods that are being utilized. We'll also ask for the solicitation documents, vendor responses, how you evaluate the contract, the reconciliation of USDA foods, and any agreement for the processors. If you're using cash in lieu of commodities or your process end products, we will not be conducting a review on those items. Again, when we speak about purchasing cooperatives, we should be very clear is that the cooperatives that you may be utilizing, we will work with to gather information related to those particular vendors that were procured utilizing the cooperatives. However, we will ask various questions regarding the management of those cooperatives, how you determine if the contract is being compliant, if you have different, if you have the cost analysis that was conducted for those particular vendors, various items that are related to the purchasing cooperatives that we'll want to make sure that our reviewers ask those specific questions. So even though the documentation will be streamlined, there is still a lot that is involved when we discuss cooperatives and how that part of that is managed. And once we have received all the requested documentation, our team will take a very thorough review of the contracts, of the solicitations, invoices. They will compare invoices to contracts to see how it is being complied with on pricing. They will ask specific questions related to contract management. Our team will also review any documents at their disposal related to whether or not you purchase something with capital expenditures and things of that nature. So really that whole process of evaluating the documentation incurs within the review. And once that is completed, they will communicate any potential findings. Once the procurement portion of the review has been completed, we'll complete the rest of the administrative part of the review, which generally includes the general review areas in your critical areas as well. And then once the whole review has been completed, they will follow up with you in an exit conference. The exit conference will, the reviewer rather will tell you when that exit conference will take place. They'll report any findings and provide you with as much information related to providing you an understanding of that finding, as well as ensure that you understand the corrective action process, what it entails, and what occurs after that corrective action has been approved. So as the CE, you should have a very good understanding of the elements of the review once that CAD takes place, and provide you a timeline of what to expect when the CAD has been accepted and when you will receive a letter of closure. So we also want to provide you, now that we've provided you how we will be incorporating our procurement review into the administrative review, we really want to help you understand what we have seen the past year in terms of findings in the procurement portion of the review. One of our top findings has been that CEs do not have documented procurement procedures. And I just really want to stress at this point, when we talk about procurement procedures, it's much more than just having something written. CEs should take this opportunity to evaluate the internal processes and incorporate how there may be differences with utilizing these federal funds and how they would utilize these the funds to ensure proper procurement. There is guidance on what should be included in the procurement procedures, and there's a lot of information in ARM section 17 of Square Meals, but it really, if you have a living document and you're utilizing those procurement procedures to outline how you're conducting your procurement procedure, it will be really important for the reviewers to have a very firm understanding of that from the onset. And so if you do have a living document, please ensure that the reviewer has the version that you are utilizing for that procurement for the year that they're reviewing that procurement documentation. Another top finding for CEs have been performing cost price analysis in connection with every procurement action in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold, including contract modification. We often speak about cost price analysis as being the first step in the procurement, but it is a requirement when you're utilizing the procurement for anything over the simplified acquisition threshold, and must be done prior to the solicitation. And so when our reviewers look at that information, they're looking to assess whether or not this cost price analysis was conducted prior to the solicitation, and does it include an understanding of how they determined if the cost was reasonable. So as a CE, you should always include that information, the documentation. It will help support that in your procurement. But it's always important to also note that when we talk about cost price analysis, that you utilize a form of this cost price analysis in most every step of the procurement process, or rather the first steps of the procurement process. It helps determine what method that you will utilize to ensure that you're using the most the method that will provide you the most efficient and financial responsible way of utilizing those federal funds. We do want to note that cost price analysis does not need to be a complicated process. You want to consider how you utilize that information, and likely you're already utilizing much of that in your process already. But you may need to be able to show the documentation of what that looks like for you. It could be very simplistic or it could be very complicated. But what we're looking at is what is the process that you undertake to forecast and prepare yourself to know that these expenses and utilizing these funds where you will have to ensure that procurement regulations are being followed. So it's really important to think through that ahead of time and include it in your procurement procedures. For example, if you know that you will be spending a total amount for dairy vendors, or you understand that your enrollment data is going to increase or decrease, you may have to assess that information early on to see what that value of that's going to look like. And if you have an understanding of what that amount will be, so that you can determine what is the best method to utilize. Another top finding we have seen this past year centers around the bid and evaluation of awards, awarded contracts. So in your RFP, your solicitation, you should be publishing how you will evaluate that contract. And what we have found is that there have been some issues around either providing the documentation to show that the evaluation was conducted per the RFP, and or there's not supporting documentation to show, really to validate that information. You want to ensure that costs be given the highest score value and that the documentation must be retained. So again, really important to provide very clear understanding of how that contract was awarded through your documentation. Some of the things that we do look at are how the documented criteria was used, and was it used the same way for every proposal? Were points allocated for the vendors in the same way? That there was no unfair advantage over one particular proposal over another, and if their procurement procedures reflect how they are utilizing the evaluation criteria as it relates to the child nutrition funds. Another finding that we've had quite a bit last year was our CEs spreading purchases equitably under micro purchase. This is particularly evident when you see several different, or rather when a CE utilizes micro purchase just for everyday items. Now, it should be noted that micro purchase should be for non-routine items. If you elect to do that. Now, if you don't and you've utilized or you have various reasons and can document why you're utilizing micro purchase in a different manner, then it needs to still meet that element of distributing the purchases equitably among qualified suppliers. So it's really important to, one, be able to assess that in your procurement procedures, and two, to show the documentation as to the reasons why you may have had particular issue with this. For formal contracts, we have seen that there has not been sufficient oversight on maintaining the contracts with terms and conditions and or specifications. Again, this is a requirement as the roles and responsibilities are defined in procurement procedures and the code of conduct of who will be managing these contracts and how will they be managed. And so when we're reviewing this information, again, we will ask specific questions related to how this occurs and look at pricing of those particular contracts to ensure that there's been oversight, not just in the pricing section, but other sections that are included in the contract. Our team has also found that when invoices have been reviewed with the contract requirements, again, they're not being managed to the point where someone is looking at the amount that the CE is paying for and ensuring it meets the contract specifications or the terms of that contract. We've also found this past year that several contracts did not have the Buy American provision in their formal contracts. If you have a contract that includes food, this provision is required. So it's really important that you also include it in your procurement procedures that indicates when you will utilize the provision. We have also found this past year that the written code of conduct is not clearly defined in terms of what will occur if there's a conflict of interest or if there is apparent conflicts of interest. So it's really important to assess your code of conduct when you're looking at your procurement procedures as well. No, you don't have to include it as part of the procurement procedures, but we should be able to identify very clearly what is acceptable activities and what is not, and what actions will occur if there are violations. Was this procurement in compliance with the requirement for appropriate threshold? And what we have found with this particular finding is that CEs are not assessing the value of their purchases in totality. And so it's really, again, goes back to that forecasting of how you plan to utilize these federal funds. Most of you probably submitted a budget already and have an idea of how much money you will be spending on in certain areas. This really is no different than understanding that if you have a particular, or rather, if you know that you are needing items every year, that's how you look at that budget, look at those forecastings and apply it to how you will utilize procurement. And so we have found that CEs often exceed thresholds because it's not being reviewed either consistently, either at the beginning of the year or throughout the year. Again, we will be looking at thresholds if CE is self-certified and applying compliance accordingly. Cost price analysis, again, that's really just where you start at determining what that looks like for any of your particular items that you are going to purchase this year. And so, one of the criteria for that is determining how you ensure that the price is reasonable. Are you, looking at the market analysis of that information? And then keep maintaining documentation that shows you have done your due diligence. It is a matter of determining your process and how you're ensuring that this was the most cost-effective way for your CE to purchase these items. So, again, goes back to how you prepare and purchase, rather forecast for these purchases. We don't expect this to be a very complicated way of comparison, but there has to be some documentation and some methodology that as a CE, you have thought through that process ahead of time. And hopefully it's indicated in your procurement procedures that how you make those evaluations and how you apply them to any methods, procurement methods. And that really conducts our training. We have several resources that are available to you. We highly recommend that you visit our page, squaremeals.org. There is a lot of resources, including the ARM that is available to you. Of course, you can always go to USDA's website, and ICN has training that is available for you as well. As always, you can contact us through these various methods. And now we will open it up to some questions.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate that. You did an amazing job with all that wonderful information. So as CEs, we hope that this was valuable for you. And so, yes, the chat's open. So let me see if there's any questions. So we have about 10 minutes or so for questions. I am starting to see some questions come through. So we do have a panel of subject matter experts. Myself, Mary, Rachel, Jackie, Lena, and Mitch available, and hopefully between one of us we'll be able to answer all these valuable questions. So I'll just read them off. We had a procurement review in the 2021 school year, but we are having an AR in 21-22. We will now go through a second procurement review of our AR in 21-22. If so, will the same company who conducted the previous procurement review now be part of our AR? So if that's the case, that you had a procurement review during the 2021 school year, you will not be going through a second procurement review in 21-22. So if you could put, I guess, the name of your CE into the chat, we can, and your contact information, we can contact you individually about your particular circumstances of the review, but we will not be repeating reviews more than once in a 4-year cycle. Okay, from John, is there a method to upload the small purchase information, example, vendor name, ID number, amount, etc., or does this need to be entered manually?
So John, yes, the small purchase information, all that information does have to be uploaded manually. You will have to enter it for each one of your vendors that are on your vendor paid list, except for those exceptions we discussed earlier. So yes, and that is the method that TXUNPS uses.
Thank you. From Hannah, so we should do a cost analysis prior to formal procurement.
That is prior to the solicitation. Yes. So before you determine, the technical requirements, you need to have an assessment. And usually, if you're utilizing a cooperative, they'll probably provide you your velocity reports, and then you'll do an assessment on that cost of what it should look like for you. So again, we're not asking it to be overly complicated, but there should be some cost comparisons so that you know that if you're looking at a particular vendor for this, or rather not even the vendor yet, but you're taking the time to assess what the amounts are for any vendor that you have, that you know where you're starting from. And Mitch, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would just say that, that's going to be one of the things we're going to be asking about or asking for. That document has to be provided. So the school districts need to really make sure that that's done prior to that formal procurement, and that that documentation is secure with the CE, even if it was done by the cooperative. So it's the CE's responsibility to make sure they have that in their possession, and it should be written into your procurement procedures, so you can see that each time, and when you're going back and training your employees, they can see that, and so that becomes actually just a part of the normal procurement process. Thank you, Mary.
Okay. Is there a code of conduct template available?
No, we have not seen a code of conduct template. I believe that TASBO does have some templates, but I'm not seeing that consistently used.
Can you provide clarification on small purchase aggregates? Mitch, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So yeah, that's a great question, because we're seeing that some folks in their procurement procedures are writing that the simplified threshold is $250,000. And that is a federal circumstance, but not in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, it is at $50,000. So anything over $50,000 requires the school district or the cooperative to do a formal procurement. However, some school districts, very few, but some have a threshold that's set more restrictive. And the school board can set a more restrictive threshold. It could be less than 50. So it's important that you all know that. And so because that has to be written into your procurement procedures, and then you have to abide by it, because we're gonna actually do the compliance up against the most restrictive threshold.
Okay. We recently completed a HR financial review as of June 2021. We will operate seamless summer for 21-22. We have been notified that we will receive a seamless summer administrative review. Will we also complete a financial review for this upcoming AR? So this is Kenyatta. Okay, Kenyatta, we could get back to you specifically about your review. Okay, will there be more guidance available on filling out the chart in TXUMPS and a procurement review?
So there is going to be a helper guide on filling out the chart in that initial DOR email. So you should be receiving that. And it does have very similar to the helper guide for the AR and specific to the PR, and gives you details around completing the table for each one of those methods.
Lost my place in the Q&A, so hang on a second. Okay, here. How do you know if your micro purchase cost is self-certified? So that's a process that you'll have to go through with the Texas Education Agency if you're a school district. And so they have a self-certification process outlined on their website. And so if that's something that you want to exercise, if you're a school district or a charter school, then you're welcome to go through that process of self-certification. Okay, for the top 10 findings, we are required to complete our cost price analysis prior to renewal of the RFP contract. We completed a cost price analysis for ? I guess this is about the finding number 10. I think they're asking if they're supposed to do a cost price analysis prior to the renewal of the RFP contract.
No, that's not required at the renewal. It's required prior to the formal procurement, because once you've done the procurement and you're redoing on your renewals, it's not a requirement, not at all.
Yeah, I think the finding that we discussed was prior to the formal contract. So
Yes.
Yeah, it's very specific to that.
Would a letter from a vendor along with a Buy American compliance form suffice as documentation that vendor complies with Buy American provisions?
Well, again, if you already have that information documented in your procurement procedures, you have it in your RFPs, your contracts, and then you can show the reviewer how you maintain that information through the form and how you ensure that it's being compliant. the form will suffice. Now, keep in mind for the administrative review portion of that, we will be asking basically the same information. So if you're utilizing a form that shows that this the C, or rather there is a reason why that you're utilizing items that are not Buy American, we will ask for that information during the review.
So if we are scheduled for a review in 21-22, from which period will you be reviewing documentation? So this is kind of a multi-part question. It's kind of whether you're talking about the programmatic, the financial, or the procurement portion of the review. So the answer is a little bit different. Usually with the programmatic side of the review, we view the month prior to us coming on site. And then we review, so the prior month in the current month for the programmatic side of the review. And generally speaking, with the financial and procurement areas, it is the year prior. Okay. Is there a procurement manual template available on Square Meals?
Currently, no.
Yeah, currently no. Okay, and I see some school districts that are giving some contact information, so thank you very much. What happens in our co-op? What I think this is supposed to say, what happens if our co-op procured services or items incorrectly?
Well, as we're reviewing that documentation currently, it will be considered a finding, but we will, before we do that, we really want to make sure we understand the documents and that everything has been outlined in our understanding of that. We don't take those things very lightly. So we want to make sure that if that is occurring, we know why. We'll be able to communicate not just to the CE, but to the co-op as well.
Yeah, and I know, Mary, you mentioned this, TDA is conducting reviews of the co-ops at this time. And so one of the big advantages of that is that, of course, getting everybody on the same page and compliant is wonderful and great. But it's also really going to help when we come to do the procurement reviews with the CE. So we won't have to ask we won't ask the questions that we've already gained the information and documentation from the co-ops, which will be great. Okay, I think we'll take one more question. All of the information related to procurement review, it'll be required during the same 12-week time frame that the other AR uploads are also due. Yeah, so we're trying to make this a seamless process, Kristen. So we're going to have one checklist with all of the items for the administrative review in totality, the program, the financial, and the procurement. And so since it does take a little bit more time to get the procurement and resource management or financial part of it, then, of course, we ask for that as soon as our first contact with y'all. But everything will be in the same time frames as you're used to with the administrative review. We worked in all parts of the program with that. Okay. It is 3:30 and I know we do have more in the chat. So what we are going to do, as we did with the other webinar, is we will extract all the questions from the chat and we will be answering them. And when we post this webinar, we'll post all the answers to the chat. We'll be getting back with everybody that expressed interest and put their contact information there. So thank you very much. And we will also be posting this webinar in a self-paced training that you can take at any time. We're also going to be in August coming out with some webinars more specifically on the administrative review, kind of the whole 12-week call of what's in the checklist, what are we going to be asking for, how to document, where to document, what do you need to upload. So we're going to have a very specific webinar, actually multiple webinars on that is going to come out in August. So we're excited to be able to release that to y'all and hopefully that's helpful. I wanted to thank our training department for really helping pull together. Thank you to Mary, you did a wonderful job presenting it. Thank you to Mitch for all your insight on all of this. I appreciate that. So thank you all for attending and this will be on the website in the upcoming weeks. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.